It is time for lesson 4.10, estimating products, our last video for unit 4. Woo! All right, so here's your I can statement. I can round whole numbers and decimal numbers to estimate the product in a multiplication problem. Go ahead and jot that down, and I'm going to get started. Okay, so I'm going to go through rounding first, and then we'll look at how to use that to help us estimate some products later as we can move through the video. Okay, so if you look at round 42 to the nearest 10, which 10 is closer to 42? And you may remember seeing something like this when you're in 4th grade. I know I did it with my 4th graders before, just to kind of give them a visual reference here. So I'm looking at that 4, that's the tens place, just to kind of keep myself in mind of what I'm doing here. I have to ask myself, is 42 closer to 40 or 50? Well, it's only 2 away from 40, it's 8 away from 50, so I know that that's closer. That's going to put 42 right about there, which is going to be closer to 40. Now let's look at round 762 to the nearest 100. Okay, so which 100 is it closer to? Well, it's 62 away from 700, and it's 38 away from 800, so it's going to be somewhere right about there, and that means it's going to be closer to 800. I would round that up. How about this one down here? 86 hundredths to the nearest tenth. Which is closer to 86 hundredths? Well, sometimes for me it just helps if I just stick those. I look at that, there's the place I'm looking at, but I like to look at having zeros on there. That makes more sense to me because now I've got 2 digits and 2 digits. So I've got 80 hundredths, 90 hundredths, which is closer to 86 hundredths. Well, it's 4 away from 90. It's 6 away from 80 hundredths, so that's going to put it at 0 and 90 hundredths or 0 and 9 tenths. Either way, if that's written either of these two ways here, that's totally fine. Last one over here is 263 thousandths to the nearest hundredth. That's what we have to round it to, so we're going to round it to that place value. Which hundredth is closer? Okay, again, I'm going to put those zeros on the end. Is 263 thousandths closer to 260 or 270 thousandths? Well, it's 3 away from 60. It is 7 away from 70. So it's going to put it about there. So it's going to be closer to 260 thousandths or 26 hundredths. I know they wanted us round to the hundredths place, but I would accept this again either way. Okay. Now, let's go to rounding method 2. And if rounding is one of those skills where you need to do a little bit of work or it's not comfortable with you, I strongly recommend you write these down in your math notebook. If you're a confident rounder, then you won't need to do that, okay? This is the kind of where you take ownership of your learning and know where you are as a learner, okay? So, first thing you would do is you would circle the digit in the rounding place, okay? That would be the first step, and there's 6 steps altogether, okay? So if we're looking at a number, we'd circle a digit in the rounding place. Then we'd underline the digit to the right of the rounding place. After we've done that, we check that digit. If the underlying digit is less than 5, which should be 4, 3, 2, 1, or 0, the digit in the rounding place stays the same. Okay? If the digit is 5 or more, as in 5, 6, 7, 8, or 9, the digit in the rounding place increases by 1. All digits to the right of the rounding place are replaced with zeros. The digits to the left of the rounding place stay the same, and there is one exception, and I will cover that with you. Check out this awesome All right, so let's take a look at this in action. All right, so we're going to round these numbers to the nearest 10. So we're going to follow those steps. We're going to round it to the nearest 10. So we're going to circle a digit in the rounding place, which is the tens place. Okay, and I'm going to underline the digit to the right of the rounding place. It happens to be a 6. If the underlying digit is less than 5, it's not, so I'm going to skip down to step 4. the underlying digit is 5 or more, it is, I have to increase the digit in the rounding place by 1, which means this 4 is going to turn into a 5, and the other place value here is replaced by 0. There's only one place value. When you see the hundreds, you'll see that's going to be more than 1. So that's going to end up being 50. Okay, so this number went up by 1, and this place value got changed to a 0. Okay, so let's look at the second one. Same rule applies. Going to circle that digit in the rounding place. Going to underline the digit to its right. This is a 1. Okay, so the number in the rounding place stays the same. That stays a 7. And this still changes into a 0, so that's going to end up being 70. Let's take a look at the nearest hundred this time. Okay, so I'm going to underline the digit in the hundreds place. I'm going to underline the digit immediately to the right. In this case, the tens place. I've got a 3 there. That 3 tells me that my 2 is not going to change, and now both those numbers after the 2 this time are going to be replaced with zeros, which means that my rounded number to the nearest hundred becomes 200. And the next number, I've got a 4 in the hundreds place. If I underline the digit next to it, that's a 5. 5 or higher, I round that number up. So when I do that, it's going to make the circle digit is going to become a 5, and the other numbers are going to become zeros, and that's going to be 500. Now let's move to the decimal numbers, okay? Nearest tenth. Again, I'm going to circle the number in the tenths place. I'm going to underline the digit in the rounding place, or next to the rounding place, and it's going to tell me what I'm going to do. I got a 3 there, which means my 7 is not going to change. Now it says nearest tenth, but I would accept this answer either way, okay? You could write this as 0 and 70 hundredths, because that 0 doesn't change its value, or 0 and 7 tenths. Either one you're comfortable with. For a lot of you, it's going to make more sense, because we talked about replacing it with zeros, to leave that as 0. Okay, so let's look at the next one. We've got a 9 in the tenths place. I've got a 1 in the hundredths place, which means that my 9 is going to stay where it is. That 1 is going to change to a 0, so it's either 0 and 90 hundredths or 0 and 9 tenths. Again, either of those are okay. So how about the hundredths place? So now I'm going to move over to the right for the thousands place. So we'll circle that 3 because it's in the hundredths place. We'll underline that 2 because it's in the thousands place. That 2 tells me that that 3 is not going to change, okay? And you'll notice the number to the left this time. We haven't had that yet, but when you have a number to the left, okay, that's what we talked about in number 6. That stays the same with one exception, which I'm going to go through with you in just a minute. So this 5 is not going to change. You're going to see it's still there. So we got 5, 3, and we're going to put a 0, okay? So we're either going to have 530 thousandths or 53 hundredths. So that's where rule number 6 here comes into play. All right. So let's look at this next one here. I've got a 0 in my hundredths place. I've got a 9 in my thousandths place. So if I round that up to the next place value, because it's a 9, this is going to become a 1. And again, none of these numbers over here are going to change. So I'm going to have 610 thousandths or 61 hundredths. So let's talk for a minute about that exception to the rule. Okay. When you have to round up and the digit or the number in the rounding place is 9. This is where this changes a little bit. Now, I don't believe you're going to have a lot of that in your seat work, if any, but I just want you to be aware of it, okay? So let's say I have to round 896 thousandths to the nearest hundredth, okay? Well, look at my number in my rounding place. That's a 9, and this 6 next to it tells me I got to round that number up, okay? If I round that number up to 9, that's going to become 10, okay? So which means I'm going to have to end up carrying over all the way over to the tenths place as well. And I'm going to show you that as a quick addition problem. So I would end up taking my 89 hundredths here, because I'm going to round it up by 1 hundredth. When I do that, I end up getting 90 hundredths or 9 tenths, because not only does this digit change, but now that I've added, I have to carry over into that next place value. So just something to be aware of as you're looking at that, okay? So let's talk about, now that we figured that out, we're going to use some estimation to check some answers, because a lot of times when we're doing our math in class, I notice we're not quite hitting on those right numbers. And if we could just figure out a way to do a quick estimate, we could see if we're even close to where we need to be. So let's go through a couple of these together, okay? So 24 and 39. I notice this ends in a 4. I'm going to round these both to the nearest 10 to start with, and I'm going to show you something else here in just a minute. So 24 to the nearest 10, because that's a 4, is going to be 20. Because this is a 9, I'm going to round that 3 up to 4. That's going to give me 20 times 40, which is 800. Now, when I get my actual answer, that's 936, you can see I'm quite a ways off if I compare my estimate here. Sometimes it's helpful, and you can know if you're a little more comfortable in multiplication, to make this, say, 25 times 40, okay? That would be 1,000. I rounded this one up to 25 by 1, and I made this into 40. Now, I'm not saying you have to do that, but sometimes you'll find your answers will be a little more accurate if you can do that. Okay, that's just 20 times 40 is 800. 5 times 40 is 200. It's still mental math. You can still do that in your head. 800 plus 200 is 1,000. Okay. Now, let's take a look at the next one. I've got 152 times 32. I could round this one up to 200 because this is a 5, and I'm going to round it to the nearest 100. I didn't round it to the nearest 10 this time. And I rounded this one to the nearest 10. And you can do that. You can round one to the nearest 10 and one to the nearest 100 when you're dealing with 2-digit and 3-digit numbers. Now, that would give me 6,000. When I calculate my actual answer, I get 4,832. I'm quite a ways off again. So I might want to do a little bit closer estimate. Maybe round both of these to the nearest 10 instead of rounding the first one to the nearest 100. So when I do that, I get 150 times 50, which gives me 4,500. Okay, so that's another way to take a look at that. And you can see 4,500 is a lot closer to 4,832. And the nice thing is when I look at these two numbers here, I'm not that far off. I've got to be close. Okay, doesn't mean you're right, but at least you have some knowledge that you're close to where you need to be in terms of your answer. So let's look at these decimal numbers. I'm going to round both of these numbers to the nearest tenth. Okay, if I do that, I get 0 and 7 tenths times 0 and 2 tenths, which equals 14 hundredths. Got to remember, 7 times 2 is 14. Got 2 decimal places there. 1, 2. Okay, my actual calculated answer is 148 thousandths, but you can see my first 2 digits are spot on. I'm at 14, and there's an 8 in the thousandths place. Could I round this to 75 hundredths and multiply it by 2 tenths? Sure, I could. Okay, but I'm not that far off. I was way off up here, which is why I went through and did a second estimation just to check to see how close I was. Let's look at number 4 here. I've got 12 and 3 tenths times 3 and 7 tenths. So if I round those to whole numbers, I got 12 times 4, which equals 48. When I calculate out the answer over here, I get 45 and 51 hundredths. I'm less than 3 away, so I feel good about where that is. I don't feel the need to do a second estimate to see if I'm any closer. Okay, so now it's your turn. All right, you're gonna get some practice problems. For the first 4, first 2 you're gonna round to the nearest tenth. You're gonna round these to the nearest hundredth, and then down here I need you to estimate the answer before you solve it. I need you to write the estimate in your book and this answer to your estimate, and then you need to go ahead and solve with the exact answer, and I'll need to see the work for that as well. Okay, here's your guided question. How is estimation useful when checking your answers? And I would also like you to create a problem of your own for your classmates to solve. All right, we'll see you soon.